Sorry guys, I'm gonna sit. We think of going off the grid as a choice people make to reject the trappings of modern life and embrace the natural world. In reality, there are lots of people who go off the grid for less romantic reasons. They're called poor people. And in 2012, I was one of them. I was unemployed, living alone, burning through the last of my savings, and as I did, I started making my unintentional move off the grid piece by piece, giving up the car, then the internet and TV, then my cell phone. After a few months of being effectively unplugged from the modern world, I started adapting to the simple solitude, even enjoying it a little. Part of me felt smugly superior to the general populace and their smartphones and their families and electricity. I don't need any of that shit, I thought, the day they turned off my lights. In fact, you know what? Fuck jobs, fuck bills, fuck the grid. I'm out. And with that, the publicists in my brain started spinning my financial shortcomings into a moral stand against the establishment. In an instant, I wasn't poor anymore. Instead, I was principled. So what if I might lose my apartment soon? Apartments are cells for the prison of capitalism. That's where they want you. I was breaking free. It was incredibly liberating and incredibly delusional. I started building an exit strategy, readying myself to pack it all in and literally head for the hills once my money ran out. I decided since I hadn't so much as gone camping in 15 years, I'd probably need to read up on my survival training. So grabbing what little loose change I had left, I headed out to the used bookstore. Unfortunately, the walk from my apartment to half-price books wasn't an easy one. It included passing through 2 sketchy alleyways and a busy feeder road with no crosswalk. The most daunting part of the journey, though, was that I had to go through a long, dark train underpass, which felt like a smaller, less sanitary version of the mines of Moria. It was painted up in gang tags, reeking of piss and car exhaust. Crows hopped along the train tracks, chattering in their alien dialect. Lining the ground was a sticky, coarse gravel of broken glass and cigarette butts. I decided to walk through this urban petri dish as quickly as possible, so as not to disturb the volatile ecosystem within. But when I got to the midpoint, where it was darkest, something caught my eye. I saw a white sneaker in the black. I pulled out my phone and shined a light on it, and when I did, I saw that it was attached to a leg, lying motionless along the wall. I was looking at a body. It was just lying there, partially covered in canvas. It seemed like the kind of place where someone could get stabbed, and it looked to me like someone had. I screamed, and I'm not proud of that, but that's what happened. I let out a Homer Simpson-esque yelp of fright, and when I did, the body that I thought was a corpse did something that corpses aren't supposed to do. It sat bolt upright and started screaming back at me. A head popped out from under the canvas, and this made me scream louder for a few moments until I realized, no, this man wasn't dead. He wasn't a zombie. He was just homeless. Very, very homeless. My eyes had adjusted to the dark now, and I could fully see his face, crusted in dirt and mucus, topped with a twiggy patchwork of hair that would have looked like a bird's nest in some other context. From under his tarp, he eyed me with fear and belligerence. I stopped screaming, and when I did, the situation made a sharp left from scary to painfully awkward. Sorry, I mumbled bashfully. He didn't respond. He just stared. Sorry, I mumbled again, and again he said nothing. I turned around and speed walked away, like the skittish suburbanite I was. So over the next week, I couldn't get the underpass guy out of my head. I'd seen my fair share of homeless people before, but I'd never seen anyone that homeless. I mean, the guy was living under a bridge, sharing his lot with murder of crows that, I'd have to say, looked particularly murdery. Homeless. Might not have been the word for him. He looked undomesticated. Between his leathery, sun-worn skin, his wolfish pelt of hair, and his thick, furry beard, if I'd seen him in a picture, I might have thought he'd been unfrozen from a time before Homo sapiens. Clearly, this guy had been through some shit, and as someone who was planning to embark on a similar, off-the-beaten-path journey, I should have been respectful. I should have tried to learn from him. Instead, I'd screamed in his face and ran away. I'd done exactly what you'd expect some fat, overprivileged millennium like me to do. Hit by an acute onset of self-loathing, I started binge-eating unheated cans of soup, pouring healthy servings of vodka into the broth, and somewheres around my third chicken noodle cocktail, I decided I had to make things right with this underpass guy. A week after our first run-in, I headed back into the train tunnel and approached him cautiously. "Hello, sir," I said. He stared at me, impassively. "Listen, I'm sorry for bothering you. I'm sure you're busy. I just want to apologize for what happened the other day." He didn't say anything. That was okay. I had a whole speech planned. "You know, the way we treat reformed convicts in this country is despicable. Not that I'm assuming you're a convict, though. Statistically, you probably are. And hey, that's fine. No judgment. I bet there's a ton of stuff you could teach the world." The man cut me off by grunting, then lay down, pulling his tarp over his head. "Oh, okay, sure. Do your thing," I said. "Just let me run through the bullet points, and then I'll leave you alone." I might have gone on with this apology I'd spent 2 days writing, which included a long section on the death of the middle class and some ripped-off Bob Marley lyrics, but I was cut off by a roaring sound in the distance. The train tracks started to vibrate, and the crows hopped off of them, scattering left and right. I realized now that when the underpass guy had covered himself up with the tarp, it wasn't to ignore me. It was to brace himself for the oncoming train, which had almost reached us. Just to put things in perspective, a full-speed freight train with its horn blaring can be heard from over 5 miles away. Extrapolating from that, try to imagine what it sounds like to hear one from 3 feet away in an enclosed space. It was easily the loudest thing I'd ever heard. The horn made me fall to my knees. The air around me whipped into a whirlwind that sent trash flying everywhere, including my face. Something wet and sticky hit me in the forehead, and I fell back to the gravel. And caught in this frenzy of sound and wind, after a few seconds, I had a moment of clarity. I looked at the underpass guy, lying beneath his tarp, shielding himself from the cacophony, and I realized 2 things. Firstly, I realized he didn't remember me at all. Our accidental screaming contest last week didn't even rank on the list of bullshit he lived through every day. Secondly, I realized I needed to get back on the fucking grid. Moreover, I needed to admit to myself that I liked the grid, and I wanted the grid, and that's okay. The grid has hospitals. It has ice cream and solution for my contact lenses. It's really a nice grid when you think about it. And sure, there's honor in living off the grid for those who can do it, and there is something unsettling about being reliant on modern comforts. But I'd rather be a dependent drone in an air-conditioned apartment than a self-made man in an underpass. I'd rather be the grist on the mill of capitalism than grime on the side of the highway. I'd rather be somebody than somebody. After a few agonizing minutes, the train passed. I stumbled into a standing position, my ears still ringing. I brushed myself off and looked down at underpass guy who was still covered in the tarp. "Sorry," I mumbled to him for a 3rd time. "Seriously, sorry." I turned around and headed back towards home. I'd been in the dark of the underpass long enough by this point that transitioning back into the light of day was a bit of an adjustment. But it was an adjustment I was happy to make. Thanks.